Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm here with my friend Diana today, and we are going to be talking about discovering and integrating a gender identity different from what you were assigned at birth as an adult. And I'm Jen, and I support polyamorous parents and other people who want to fully integrate their identities or better understand their child or partner's identities without pathologizing anyone and in a way that supports thriving and healthy boundaries and good communication for everyone involved. So there will be links below the video if you want to learn more about my work or connect. So Diana, um, let's start with what are your pronouns
Yeah,
and how would you define or how do you understand your gender identity now?
yeah. Well, my pronouns are she, her, or they, them. And I guess like the way that I understand my gender identity is that I am a non-binary female person. And, I feel like a person at the core, and it happens that I'm in a female body. That's how I feel.
So if I'm understanding that right, your sense is that for you, the body you're in is not incorrect, but the way that we socially decide what happens because of that body is not accurate for you.
I don't know if that's exactly precisely what like I feel. It's just that I don't mind being perceived as female because that's what I've always been perceived as. There's definitely a little bit of like masculine leaning traits that I have. And sometimes, if I am, you know, perceived as being more like mannish or something, I really don't mind. I enjoy it sometimes. So it's just I feel like I'm a person first, uh, and like whatever people perceive me as second.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Which yeah.
your understanding of your identity is not limited to what fits into the box of
Oh
the female
yeah. I
construct.
don't think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really helpful because I think a lot of people who are relatively new to the idea of understanding a gender identity understand the concept of like, I was born in the wrong body,
That's
and
true.
therefore I want to transition my body to better matching how I feel on the
Yeah.
inside. And this is a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is that I always understood like the trans identity, which I do consider being non-binary under the trans umbrella, but I always understood it previously as it needing to have dysphoria in order for you to be trans. And I've never really felt dysphoria about my gender identity, about being assigned female at birth, about being, you know, a girl or anything like that, but I didn't feel euphoria at being a girl, euphoria at being perceived as female, euphoria about like, oh, I'm a woman. So like I've always wanted to feel that way that people do, and I didn't understand that, being non-binary, being perceived as masculine sometimes is actually really empowering to me and does bring feelings of gender euphoria to me, which
Mm.
that honestly is a way that the conversation around being transgender has changed a lot in the last I would say like decade or so. Is that dysphoria is no longer, I think, a requirement for being trans.
Yeah. And I also, yeah, I think that's a really, I think I hear a lot of clarity in how you've come to understand yourself. And so I hope that that helps other people who might similarly not fit the box that they think in their head is
Yeah,
what being trans is.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, so like for myself, I think there are some similarities and some differences in how we identify. So I also use both she and they
mhm,
pronouns, and I don't, there's nothing about the body I was born in. I mean, beyond like more so than the average person would want to change. Like there's
yeah,
nothing about the sexual presentation of the body I was born in that I would
yeah,
want to change. Um, but I realized over time that the social construct of the idea of woman isn't a box that I want to be in or enjoy being in. And I
Yeah.
think it's slightly different in that I don't necessarily desire being perceived as masculine. It's more that I don't really want to be perceived as a woman, in quotes. And
Yeah.
whatever somebody thinks that means, I don't
Yeah.
want it. I don't want it put
That's
on
yeah,
me.
and I think there's also a bigger conversation to have about what feminism looks like today versus when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, feminism was not anything that I related to. It didn't make sense to me. But the feminism that I see nowadays, I'm like, yeah, that does resonate with me a little bit more. And I do think that it makes more sense in my life than it ever did before. I still don't quite get it sometimes. Like, I don't understand why it's important to feel like a certain way about being a woman. I just don't feel that.
And I mean, that makes sense because that's not something that is important to your identity.
Yeah, exactly.
And if it
Yeah.
was, you'd probably be like, I am a woman.
Yeah. And
And
I'm
it would be
not.
important to you. So, how long have you felt that being a woman or being female was not entirely accurate for you? And was there a gap between when you started to understand that about yourself and when you started to like share that with
Yeah,
people
I
around
would
you?
say so. Because it's like my entire life I've felt like a person or a child. I've never felt like a girl or never felt like a boy when I was younger. And like the social groups that I fit in were really gendered. Like the girls would hang out with the girls, the boys would hang out with the boys, and I would hang out with both of them. So it always felt like it's like I was between those two worlds. So it's like I've always felt that, but really, the moment that I like understood my non-binary being is that like I talked to my cousin who's also non-binary, and that was the first non-binary person I met, and I asked them to explain to me what that meant to them, and like literally within the first sentence it was like, "Oh, there's a word for how I feel. It's non-binary." And since then, like literally I can probably name the date exactly because it was our other cousin's wedding, that we were staying in a hotel and we stayed up all night and talked about a lot of different things, but that was one of the most important things that we talked about. And it was really really eye-opening for me that there was a good word to describe the way that I've felt my whole life.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine that you must have felt really seen
Yeah.
and less like alone in your experience.
Yeah, and especially I think it being a family member, who I've always connected with in a lot of different ways, but like they are just such a beautiful human being, and it's really nice that we're able to share that identity as well. So
Yeah. So from that moment of first realizing, so I heard there's like kind of three stages there. Maybe
sure, yeah,
there's like I don't feel like I fit this thing, but I don't know what to do with that.
yeah,
And then there's this like, oh, there's a word for that.
yeah.
And then now you're at a point of like having a pretty good understanding of yourself and who you are and how you identify. And so I'm curious, like between the, oh, there's a word for that, and now, was there an experience of like, did you feel like there was a transformation internally? Do you feel like you came to understand yourself differently?
I don't know exactly because it's like that's another thing is that I feel like my relationship with my gender has changed over the years, even since realizing that I'm non-binary. It's like I still feel that non-binary woman is probably the closest to what like I want to call myself, but my relationship with how I present that gender to the world has changed. And it's honestly, it made me feel a lot more free to be more feminine and more masculine in different ways, so that it didn't feel like I was acting anymore. It felt like I was, or like performing the role anymore of like I am a girl, I am a woman. it felt like I'm a person and today I'm going to be pretty, or
Hmm.
today I'm going to look like powerful and strong and like a lumberjack or something. But yeah, I would say I do think that my relationship with my gender continues to evolve, and I wouldn't say that it's set in stone ever. Um, I feel like I kind of ran away from what we were talking about.
No, I think that's really yeah, I heard a couple of things there that I think might be helpful for people. One of them is that I heard that there's more freedom not only to be more masculine, but also even freedom to be more feminine, because the femininity can come from choice instead of from like I have to look this way or act
Yeah,
this
I
way.
don't feel the stricture of the like clearly defined gender roles that our society still finds itself adhering to.
Yeah. And then the other piece that I heard that I think might be helpful for people is the idea that it's not like, oh, you figured this out and then you're done. That it's
Yeah,
like this is a thing that can evolve the same way everything else about you can evolve over
yeah,
time. And, what fits you right now is like, okay, and then 10 years from now, who are you going to
yeah,
be? Probably not the same person that you are today.
exactly. And that's something that it's like I think that the like however my gender presentation is might not always align with how I feel about my gender. I might feel in certain circumstances it's safer to be more masculine or more feminine. So that's something that also makes me, decide to dress a different way or decide to, you know, even use certain pronouns sometimes, depending on
Yeah.
if I feel like I'm going to be welcomed there or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is an unfortunate reality of the time and place that we live.
Yeah.
Yeah. And um, I can imagine for you, as it's important for all people to have places where they could be fully themselves, um, that it would be a lot more difficult and harmful if you had to exist always in the closet,
Yeah.
and that it's really important. Even if there are times when you have to keep yourself safe
Yeah.
over being your most authentic self,
Yeah.
that having people and places and times when you can be your
Yeah.
fully authentic self.
Yeah, and it feels like a lot of times that is like it's less places and more people. And it's like people who see who I am as a non-binary person, that makes me feel like I'm understood. And those are the people that I put the most trust in the world.
Yeah, because there's safety. There's
Yeah.
safety there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
They see me the way that I see me, which is a really, I mean, that I think is what everybody wants out of their friends and family.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what we all need is to
Yeah, right?
be able to be seen as our full and whole and complete selves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, so, other than the cousin who first gave you the word
Hmm.
non-binary, or have there been any like resources or people or anything that has been especially helpful for you in understanding your gender identity?
I guess just reading articles here and there written by trans and non-binary people, and them discussing their experiences with their relationship with their gender, that really helps me explore my relationship with my gender much better. And it's not like I'm modeling my behavior after them. It's just seeing different ways of people experiencing their identity.
Yeah, like almost like it gives you permission to explore ideas of different ways to think about
Definitely.
it.
And that's something that like I think what's been most valuable, even more than reading articles, is just knowing trans people, knowing non-binary people, and seeing how they live their lives in an everyday way, and seeing how that identity affects or doesn't affect how they live their life.
I didn't have this on the questions I gave you, so
Sure.
sorry to put you on the
No
spot, but it
worries.
just occurred to me that, we're mostly focusing on like what someone might experience if they're questioning their own gender identity.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, because I know there's probably going to be people watching who it's their child or their partner or
Mm.
someone else who's close to them who's questioning or understanding their gender differently, and or even somebody who's questioning for themselves but really doesn't have any kind of exposure to trans or
Yeah.
non-binary people yet. Is there anything that you would suggest to someone who's like, oh yeah, exposure to more trans and non-binary people, like opportunities to understand what their lives are
Yeah.
like and see whether or not that resonates, seems like a good idea, but I don't want to offend anybody or like make the space
Yeah.
unsafe for somebody else. Like, do you have
I
any
mean,
suggestions
I
for
don't,
how to
I
come
would
in?
honestly, like, I love Wikipedia. It's not a bad place to start. Encyclopedias in general are not a bad place to start because they kind of have like the cut and dry facts about things. They have data on what actually happens a lot of the times, and of course with anything there are always biases. So pick your sources wisely. But if you really are starting out from nothing, I might start there. And then from there, look at what the source material is for those articles, and really like it's most important, I think, though, to get things from transgender people themselves because that is their experience. And when we, hear stories from other people, no matter what the topic is, it doesn't have to be about being non-binary or trans or your gender identity at all. But that is something that really, like, it's so important for humans to connect with each other on the personal level and hear your personal stories. I mean, that's something like I like from a trauma background that I have, it's really important to hear other stories to know that you didn't go through it alone.
Yeah, yeah, it's really validating.
It is,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what I heard there is like that a place to start if someone doesn't have trans or non-binary people in their life or around them in their community that they know of, they definitely do, whether they know
Yeah,
it or not.
they're around.
But uh, that a place to start can be engaging with the experiences of trans and non-binary people without engaging directly with those people,
Yeah.
so that there's an opportunity to learn without the opportunity to make mistakes that might hurt somebody.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that I think a lot of people think that perhaps, oh, if I ask this question of a trans person, they'll be offended. If I do this thing around them, they'll be offended. If what you're doing is in the spirit of kindness, wanting to understand, typically no trans person will be offended. I do personally know people who are tired of having their identity questioned and their very existence denied. So if you ever do get that response from somebody, don't take it as, well, I'm never going to ask a trans person anything ever again about their identity.
Yeah,
Take it as this person has been hurt so many times and
yeah.
that is the reaction that they have because they can't take it anymore.
And even if they're not, even if you're not asking something that might be like questioning their validity, sometimes people get tired of just answering questions that you could answer by Googling.
Yeah, Google is your
So
friend, honestly.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I will suggest if you're wanting to learn like things that have helped me as I have come into more relationship with more trans and non-binary people. Um, Two things that have helped me. One is to consider whether my question could be Googled. So if my question is like in general about the trans experience,
Yes.
yes, it can be Googled. Someone has written or blogged or something about
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. If it's more about an individual person's lived experience, then obviously I can only get that by asking that individual
Yeah.
person. And if there is a rapport and a safety in the relationship, they're probably going to be willing to answer. Or at least I can bring it in with like, hey, you don't have to answer this, but I've been wondering. And with the door very open to them, be like, I'm not comfortable sharing
Yeah,
that,
and I think
which is
that's
their
really
right.
important. Yeah, that always be open to the idea that this is not the time or the place for that question right now.
Or it's
Yeah,
none
or
of
it's none of your
your
business.
business. And then the other thing that's been really helpful for me is to, because as a nice white person, I spent many years wanting to make sure that I was always perfect so that nobody was ever harmed by me, which first of all is impossible. We're all
Yeah,
harming
yeah,
each other all the time. But also getting comfortable with the idea that I'm going to make mistakes and that it's probably going to be fine as long as I do it infrequently, not on purpose, and apologize when I make
yes,
them.
yeah,
And so, yeah, just getting comfortable with the idea that even still, after I think I've been close with at least one trans or non-binary person for like a decade now, and I even still occasionally misgender someone or
yeah.
you know say something insensitive and have to be like,
That's
I'm so
yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
yeah,
And I have never like lost a friend over that
yeah.
because I work really hard at making that something
That's
that is
yeah.
infrequent and being accountable for it when I make a mistake.
Yeah, and I think accountability is really important, owning that you made a mistake. And like I just want to remember that I worked at a place with a lot of trans people, and we would have this basically every week. We would have some new people in our office coming by, and at the beginning of the week we'd have a meeting and we'd say, well, we had meetings every single day, every single morning, but we would always say, if you misgender somebody, we want to correct ourselves, apologize, and then move on. And the reason that why we move on is because we don't want to dwell on misperceptions about ourselves or somebody else. We want to correct it and take accountability for it, though, which I think that's more than half of, fixing that problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will also say one of the things that I see a lot among people who are well-meaning but conflict avoidant, which is most of us nice white people, is uh, when we see somebody else unintentionally misgender someone,
Mm,
just not saying anything, leaving it up to the person who's been misgendered to say something, which some people
that's
want. Some
yes.
people want to have the opportunity to stand up for themselves.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to take that away from somebody if they do.
Yeah.
But a lot of times somebody's going to feel uncomfortable or not sure if it's safe to correct
Yeah. And
someone.
that's something if
And
so yeah.
and that's something that I can, without risking anything to myself, say, hey, quietly. It doesn't need to be a big scene in front of somebody, but like, hey, their pronouns are they, them. And and also someone is far less likely to get confrontational about it with
A third
someone.
party.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, I would agree. And I mean it is really important, I think, to correct people anytime they make a mistake. Like at some point I think it's also like it becomes painful to keep on hearing the wrong pronouns for yourself. So it's like I feel comfortable using either she, her, or they, them equally. Um, but if I were transmasc or something and people continue to call me she, I would be so pissed off. I would be like what do you think you're doing? Like,
Yeah.
and
And one
that's something that I do see people doing, and they sort of like brush it off, but I'm like, well, no, that's not correct. Like
yeah.
you, it feels like you don't really believe in their gender identity.
Yeah. And if somebody does correct you, like if a third party
Yeah,
corrects you, going to the person you misgendered and saying, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I'll do better next time, is probably going to make their day, in my experience.
honestly, yeah, like that's something that like I've never been perfect with pronouns and stuff. I've definitely made mistakes, but it really, it's, I think, a matter of respecting who that person says they are and respecting that they know themselves better than you will ever know them.
Yeah. All right. Well, we could go down that rabbit hole a
Oh
lot, but
yeah,
there
we
are a
could
lot
talk
of
about
people
that for
who have
like
said
an hour.
lots of things about respecting pronouns. So I want to bring it back to your
Sure.
lived experience. And I'm curious about as you understand yourself now to be non binary, and
Hmm.
as you were growing up, you understood that you were a girl because that's what you were told the option was.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about if there are things looking back that you understand differently now, that you understand that you were non-binary and that you and people around you didn't get that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I would say, like, as a kid, playtime didn't make sense to me, that there were certain things that girls were supposed to do. And mostly this came from like other children, like very strict gender roles of what we were supposed to play and everything like that. And there was like a little bit of opportunity for, girls to be tomboys and boys to do baby like babysitting and stuff like that. And it's like that did happen, but it felt like there was a lot of pressure to be doing girl things and girl activities, and that if you were doing male activities or something, it was not proper or it was unusual or something like that.
So now you can look back at that and be like, oh, there wasn't something wrong with how I was playing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a lot of times when like girls would try to include me in things because, I had great friends in elementary school and stuff. Everybody, tried their best to play with me and everything. I would be like, I don't get why we're doing this. Or like I don't think I want to play this today. And it was, like just girly things. And it's like I just didn't understand like why we want to do that thing. But then also on the flip side, I was not like a very sporty person. So it's like if the boys tried to be like, "Hey Diana, let's like play this game or something," I was like, I don't know if I want to. Like, I mean, I definitely did get into arm wrestling for a long while. So, but that was,
It's
I think
almost like
that's,
you
yeah.
didn't fit into either box or
I know,
something.
yeah, yeah. It's like it's like, yeah, I never felt like I had like really close friends. I had like everyone in my class was amazing and wonderful and very inclusive. I would say even compared to other like grades in school, I found later years. Um, but like I never felt like I had a truly like best friend of either gender.
Hmm. It's interesting because I've never thought about play as a child, and so now like that like not understanding the girly play. I That was totally my
Mm,
experience as well, and I've
yeah.
never thought about that before because I always just. I mean, I got labeled as a tomboy, and I
Yeah.
kind of owned that. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I'll take that label. That works for me.
Yeah, and that's something that I
Yeah.
always wondered. It's like I'm not a tomboy, so what am I? Like, I don't know. I'm somebody who just likes to look at rocks and trees and little bugs and stuff like that. Like I liked very like stereotypically non-binary things.
I like the things that don't fit in a
Yeah.
box.
Yeah, it's like this is neither girl nor boy toy. I would like it, please.
Yeah, that's funny. Um, okay, so you've already suggested some things, but if anybody that's watching is considering whether their gender assigned at birth is accurate for them or not, do you
Mhm.
have thoughts about how they could explore that idea or think about that or?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that a lot of introspection is probably needed. And I think that like one of the best ways to do that, honestly, is just to do something like take a walk, take a drive, maybe listen to a podcast while you're doing that. Actually this really great podcast that I've listened to, and it's all like positive, sex positive, and trans friendly, trans inclusive. Um, it's called Nancy. I don't know if you've heard of that,
I
but
haven't, but I'm going
yeah,
to check it
it's
out. And we
yeah,
will make sure that link is with this video. I will find a link
yeah.
for it.
But there are some episodes that focus on gender identity, if I'm remembering correctly. It's been years since I've listened to it. But there's definitely some episodes that really made me think harder about. This was after I realized I was non-binary, but it made me think harder about what is my gender identity? How do I relate to it? How do I express that to others? How do I want to be perceived by others? So that's something I think introspection is really important because after all, it's your life, it's your body. You are who you are. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, nobody else gets to decide that for you. And talking with friends is great. Talking with family is great, but talking to yourself, I think, is where it really matters in determining your gender identity.
Yeah. And I think it's a really important thing that you just said that you are who you are. So, uh, changing how you understand your gender identity does not change you to become a non-binary person
Yeah.
or a trans person or however you end up identifying. You have always been that person,
Yes.
even if you didn't get it, much less anybody around
That's
you.
yeah.
Nothing about who you are changes. It's your understanding of who you are and understanding yourself better and more completely and more
Yeah.
deeply. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really important that it's like I've felt like more of a whole person since understanding that I'm non-binary. And it's really helped with a lot of other areas of my life that it's like, oh, I might not feel like doing this thing because it doesn't bring me gender euphoria. It actively takes away from that. Not dysphoria, I would say, but it does not add to my happiness.
Yeah. And that's something I hear a lot from people I work with who are integrating all kinds of identities. Whether it's a neurodiversity they're coming to understand as an adult, or a gender or queer identity, or a non monogamous identity, that there's like other things that have been struggles, like self esteem and self love and self compassion. And that it turns out part of why those things that have been a struggle is because of the not understanding some part of their identity.
Yeah.
And as they come to understand that part of themselves, it's like, oh, well, if I can love that part of myself, then I can also allow myself to love other parts of myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, which is why I do this work, because I mean, that's been my experience. And that's something I see over and over and over again, is like the energy and the emotional toll that it takes to try to not be whoever you are.
Yeah.
Is so hurtful.
Yeah, and that's something that I think like to deny this about myself would cause a lot more pain in my life and it would of course it would cause a lot more stress in my life that all of a sudden I'm like denying this fundamental part of who I am. And yeah, I do really like what you said just there.
Thanks. All right. If there's anybody that's watching all the way to the end here, is there anything else that you want them to hear about gender identity, or about coming to understand yourself better?
I think we covered a lot in this, so I really appreciate the time that everyone spent with us. But I do think that it's important that, LGBTQ, the Q is not just for queer, it is also for questioning. So I think it's really important and healthy to question your identity as it relates to your gender, your sexuality, even your neurotypicalness. That's something that you should always at least question. Just a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you know,
at
I
least.
think that's really an interesting idea. Like even for people who might be watching this who are pretty sure that they're cisgender and you know, sometimes there's an idea in our culture that if you question, you will be the thing that you're questioning,
Yeah.
right? And if there's like a stigma about that, then people are like, well, if I don't question, then I'm not that, which is false. But
Yeah.
also, you know, if you're cisgender, no matter how much you question your gender identity, you're still going to be cisgender, but you might
Yeah.
understand yourself better in the
Yeah. You
process.
might understand yourself, you might understand transgender people more, which I think honestly there's a lot of not understanding transgender people that is really way too prevalent in our society still. So,
Yeah,
we're moving in the right direction, I think, but it's just frustrating that it's slow. Yeah.
yeah, very slowly. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much with me and with
Yeah.
everyone who watches because, yeah, you're a lovely human and I'm glad to
Thank
know
you.
you. And I hope that some other people find better better understanding of themselves from your wisdom and your experience.
Oh gosh, I sure hope so. But yeah, thank you so much for having me and
Yeah,
having this conversation with me.
yeah, I was happy to. All right, and we will make sure that there's links below the video for if you want to check out the resources that Diana mentioned, and also if you want to connect with me and have some support in figuring out who you are and how that integrates with the rest of your life and your relationships. So I look forward to connecting with you soon.